Hey there, welcome to my channel, Ro Can Sew. I'm Ro, and this episode is about my latest make, the Simplicity 9479 jacket to go with the pants. So first I feel like I need to give a disclaimer, which may be evident when I explain my make. I don't have any professional sewing education, so some of the things that I do might be in a questionable order. I start most of my projects with just a general idea in my head, and I know that I'm probably going to be pivoting and problem solving as I proceed. I don't usually have everything completely mapped out, and I also tend to use what I have on hand. So when I talk about this make, I know that there's a lot of items on the market, decorative braids and different types of trims and stuff that exist on the market. I just use what I have on hand. My sewing is more very much self-care type of sewing. So I'm having fun with my fabric and I'm just trying to create something that I feel hopefully comfortable to wear in public. But this garment here, this project just has the bias from the fabric that I used, which is a medium weight, 100% cotton, yarn dyed, two-tone fabric. And then I also embellished it with some black yarn, and that just happens to be black yarn that I had on hand that was actually leftovers from someone else's project, and I just used what was accessible to me. So with all of that said, now we can proceed with the garment in question. So I'm going to see if I can insert some pictures as I go along. First of all, I will briefly mention the pattern that I use, which is Simplicity 9479. This is, I believe it's still current and available for purchase if anyone is interested. It is for both stable stretch wovens and non-stretch wovens. I already made the jacket and the pants from the pattern out of a stretch woven in the past, and I did the hidden button placket element that the pattern is designed for at that time. I wanted to repeat the pattern and try it out of a non-stretch woven just to compare the fit and everything compared to the stretch woven that I made it out of before. So I made this set out of the non-stretch woven, and I like this pattern because it's just a very simple pattern. The pants are just a simple straight leg, front and back pieces, side front pockets. It has a curved waistband and a side zip. The jacket is a very simple unlined jacket, which I thought would be good for the summer months coming up. So there's no lining, and like I said, it is designed for a hidden button placket, but this time around I didn't do that. The sleeves are like grown onto the jacket, so there's no fitted sleeves, there's no cuffs or anything like that. It's literally just your front pieces and your back piece, a neck facing, and that's pretty much it for the jacket. So it's a very simple pattern, very few pieces. If you do construct the pattern in the way that it is intended with the hidden button placket, you do have two separate pieces for the front. You have one piece that has all of the folds in it for the button placket, and then the underside, which has just enough of a button extension to fold over and tuck in the seam allowance to create the underlap of the fronts. I hope that makes sense. In this instance, I cut two pieces of just the underlap side so that I could just make use of the button extensions to create my button band. So I've already talked about the pants in a previous video. I'll see if I can insert a card to that. The only thing that I did differently, or I did after I finished my jacket, was because of how I ended up doing the hem on my jacket. I went back and I just added a second row of yarn to the hem of the pants because I thought that that just gave it a thicker line and kind of balanced things out. But outside of that, I haven't made any changes to the pants since you saw them in the video, other than I did launder them, which did fluff the fray up nicely. So as for the jacket, I'm going to talk about what I did and how I went about doing it. And again, there probably would have been a better order of construction for doing what I did. The reason that I went about it in the manner that I did was because when I first thought I was going to make the jacket, I thought I was going to make it with exposed seams and embellishing around the neckline and down the front button band. However, after the previous video that I talked to you about with this, I had decided that I wasn't going to do that after all. And after that video, I lost confidence in myself and I started second guessing my decision, and I decided I wanted just a very simple button band. So when I started making my jacket and actually constructing it, I constructed the button band in a way where I was thinking at the time I was not going to have exposed seams or embellished fray down the side. You can see that there's embellishment down the front of the button band, so I obviously went back at some point and made some changes, but I'm going to insert some video clips along the way if I can try to make it all make sense, because I did take some pictures and footage as I was making this jacket, so you can kind of see the process that I went through. So the first thing that I did was I constructed the button band, and I did so by, again, at the time, I was going to not make it embellished, so I decided to finish the button band with the finishings being on the inside of the jacket. So I decided to stabilize my button band, and there is a fold. I'll get my jacket here. The front of the jacket, there's this fold line where your jacket fronts fold over and turn to the inside so that you can complete your button band. I put interfacing straddling the center front line so that it would meet at that fold line and extend an even distance on the other side of the center front. So I just cut a strip of interfacing down the front. I put that in on both of the front jacket pieces, and I fused the interfacing on. I turned the button extensions to the inside of the jacket, and then I tucked in the seam allowance, and I sewed that in place. And then I also stitched a center front, or I basted a center front line. I had already marked that with a water-soluble marking pen, but I decided to go back and baste it on my machine because I just felt that that would be helpful as I was continuing to construct the jacket, so that it would just be easier to line the fronts up according to the center front basting line. And I actually found that to be very helpful when it came time to put the buttons and the buttonholes in, because the center line was clearly marked, so it was easy to center them. And I wanted to outline the button placket, and at the time I wanted to just outline the jacket portion that overlaps. So the jacket side that has the button holes on it was the one that I wanted to embellish. So at the time, once the button bands were completed, I sewed the yarn along the edge of the button placket on one side only. The inside doesn't have any yarn on the edge because you won't see it. And I sewed it on the edge, and I sewed it an even distance on the front so that the space would be symmetrical on either side of the buttonholes, which is the center front line of the entire garment. When I got done with that and I overlapped my jacket to figure out how I wanted to finish the neckline next, I decided that I was still definitely going to expose the neck facings. So what I did for those is that I sewed my neck facing fabrics together first at the shoulder seams. I should backtrack. After I finished the button placket, I kind of finished the rest of the jacket as per the instructions. I sewed the shoulder seams, I sewed up the side seams, I completed the darts on the front and the back of the jacket, and then I went back to do the decorative elements, such as the facing. So I sewed the front and back facings together at the shoulder seams, and I pinned that to my jacket at the shoulder seams just so I could see where the facings would overlap for my button band, and I marked that on the facing. And the reason I did that was because I knew that I wanted my facing to look completely continuous around the garment. I didn't want the button band to come up in the front and have the facing on either side. That's just what I chose to do. I'm not sure now if it was the wisest thing. Part of me feels like this looks a little more like a clown collar than how I had anticipated or hoped that it would look, but that's neither here nor there. So I wanted this to be continuous, and that's why I pinned it at the shoulders so that I could mark the center front. I then took the facing back off and I interfaced the wrong side of the facing, and I kept the interfacing within the seam allowances because I knew that I wanted to fray the outermost seam allowance, and I knew that the innermost seam allowance would be hidden in between the facing and the jacket. So I just pieced my interfacing together. I just used scraps that I had on hand, and I just kind of pieced bits together to make the interfacing work. I then I did a basting stitch along the entire seam allowance around the parameter of the facing, just so from the right side of the facing, I would know exactly what was going to be visible on my jacket and what was going to be hidden within seam allowances, so that I would keep all of my decorative elements only where I wanted it. And then I took that to my machine and I did a few rows of decorative machine stitching, and I did a few rows of yarn just on the facing to encompass the whole facing piece. The yarn I ended up hand basting first, just because I found that it was easier to control its application to the facing, having hand basted it in place first and then being able to go over it in machine, than trying to hold it in place and make sure that I was keeping a nice even line with it under my machine foot as I was sewing it. It was tedious, very time consuming, but I just feel like the results were much more satisfactory, in my opinion. So once I was satisfied with how the embellishment looked on the facing, and it didn't look like this at the time because I had to go back and add to it. But once I thought that I was satisfied with it, I attached it to the garment. So I sewed the neck facing, right side of the facing to the wrong side of the garment. Yeah, and did the stitching and then the trimming of the seam allowance and the understitching, and then flipped it to the outside, so then the right side of the facing is now laying on top of the right side of my jacket. And then I stitched that in place. And you can kind of see through here, this is what it looks like on the inside. So on the inside, it looks nice and clean. Once I was done with the button placket and I had the collar pretty much where I wanted it to be, and I sewed it onto the jacket, I frayed the edge of the collar, and then I moved on to the sleeves. And I did the sleeves in the same way that I did the hem on my pants. I just took 2-inch wide bias from the fabric and stitched it to my sleeve, and then did a few rows of attaching the yarn, again basting it by hand first, then machine stitching it, and some decorative machine stitching. And you can see most of the stitches on the inside. Now I will say that if I were to have made this for someone else, or if I were more fussy about this, and I could still do it if I wanted to, I could probably just take a very lightweight bias trim, like a very thin rayon or something like a thin satin, something lightweight and smooth, and I could hand stitch or probably even machine stitch, because you wouldn't really see it, on the inside to finish this edge and conceal all of the stitching. It's not that important to me, so I didn't do that, but that is an option. So just in case, if this is something somebody tries and they decide, ugh, that looks horrible, that's probably how I would resolve that. Or I could have done a facing in the same manner I did here, but that's not what I did. This is how I did it. Once I got done with that, I tried the jacket on and I absolutely did not like it. I felt that it looked a lot like pajamas. It looked very, very pajama-y, and it didn't have the oomph that I was hoping for. So I ended up going back and I added more rows of yarn at the top of the neckline to give that a more defined look. And I think I had to hand stitch because I don't see any decorative stitching on here, so I must have gone back and hand stitched all of that. I recall hand stitching it now, yes. So I had to hand stitch all of that yarn in place so that the stitching wouldn't be visible, and to define that outer edge, I just thought that it looked better. I should probably also mention that when I finished, my facing, I ended up tucking the facing part, this seam allowance here, I tucked it in between the inside of the jacket and the facing, just because of how I ended up finishing my button band, which again, I would have done that somewhat differently, but here we are. I decided that that looked better, so I decided that the way this was going to be more acceptable to me was that I was going to have to just lean into the embellishment and go ahead and outline the button bands. So that's what I did. I took some more of the 2-inch wide bias and I outlined my button bands. So I had already put my buttonholes and buttons on at this point, so I was able to button my jacket up. That way I could still keep the symmetry look that I wanted. And I attached the bias binding along the line of the yarn that I had placed on this outermost piece. And once I had that secured and I added enough rows of yarn to it and the decorative stitching, how I wanted it to look, I just sort of measured that distance and then I mirrored that on the other side and I sewed the bias onto the underside and I top stitched that and did a couple rows of the decorative yarn and then frayed the edge. So the inside of the button band doesn't look the best. You have all of the stitching that is visible. If I had done this in a different way, that I probably could have resolved that. But again, this is an unlined jacket and I wanted it to look nice, but also still be kind of casual. So I'm not fussed about it. It doesn't bother me, but I'm just showing you. So if this is something you want to try, that those are some things that maybe you want to think about if you want to have a different result on the inside of your garment. You know, I mean, you can see the serging of the darts. You can see the serging on the side seams. It doesn't bother me, but I'm just saying it's there. When I got done with that, when I did that part, I measured the bottom of the jacket and figured out where I wanted the top of my decorative edging to stop or to start. That way, when I completed the button band and all of the trim and everything, it stops just, I don't know, about a ½ inch down, just because I didn't need it. I didn't need to add a ton of bulk down here and have all of this stuff making it very thick down here. So yeah, it just goes down about a ½ inch, and then I didn't extend it any further than that. Also, because of the order that I added the bias trim to the button band, if I had known I was going to do it this way in the first place, I would have done the button band and completed it obviously before I put the facing on, and all of this excess would have been hidden up underneath the exposed facing here. But because I added my fray on in the bias trim after the fact, I just folded in the edges at the top and I just butted it up. I don't even know if you'll be able to see it because of the fray at the neckline. Butted it up as close as I could, and I just did a little bit of hand stitching to really secure that up there. And yeah, so that is all frayed. I then did the same thing on the bottom of the hem. I just added my bias trim to the bottom. I did a few rows of yarn, hand basting, then decorative stitching, and then fraying the edge. And I will say, for every place that there is fray, there is multiple rows of zigzag stitching. There's like 2 rows of yarn before all of the fraying, and each of the yarn was machine stitched with the zigzag, the triple back and forth stitch. So I know that's going to lock the fibers in place. And then I also edged just past the bottom, the last row of yarn. I did another very tiny zigzag just to further secure the fibers. So I know that all of the fray is pretty much locked in. Nothing is going to really be able to fray further than where it is now. What else? When I put the buttons on, I picked these buttons. I had just enough left over. I'm calling these my cracked ice buttons. I don't remember where I got them from, but they're black buttons, and the white center has like this crackle effect. It looks like shattered ice or something. They're really pretty. It kind of catches the light. But I didn't want to put a button at the collar. So I just have a snap. I just put a snap up there, a big snap, to try to make sure that it would stay flat, because I know sometimes these types of pieces of fabric that lay like this, they can tend to curl and pull, and I wanted to try to ensure that this would lay as flat as possible. So I have one of the largest snaps that I had on hand, and then I just put the buttons where I thought that they would be appropriate from there on out. And that's my jacket. I have some pictures of me wearing it and walking around with it, and hopefully I've been inserting some footage going along with what I've been saying. I will say that after looking at the footage of me wearing it and analyzing it a little bit, I kind of think I might go back and trim down this fray around the neck just a little bit. It feels like it might be just a little too poofy there. I don't know. Hey there, Editing Row here. This is an entirely different day. I just thought that after looking at the images of this jacket and seeing how full the fray was down the front button band and around the collar, I just wanted to show you that I did go back and trim more of it down. I just thought that it looked better without all of the excess fray, and you can kind of see this bottom row of yarn a little more clearly. And also down the button band, you can see the outermost row of yarn a little bit better. And I just think that makes it look, I don't know, less clown-esque. But I just wanted to pop this in there. I was going to save it and share it on my next Friday Sews video, but this outfit has already been split up between a few different videos. So I thought I would just pop it on and just record it really quick so you could see it after I trimmed it down further, and I think that looks better. So I just wanted to show you that. I could even go back and trim it down even more if I wanted to. I left all of the hems at the length they are in all the other images you'll see, but this is the only image that I'm going to put in of the fray being trimmed down. But I just wanted to show it to you. That's kind of the fun with this type of stuff, that you can just keep trimming it until it gets to be where you want it. So, yep, that's it. That's all I wanted to show you. So, thank you. Bye. But that's my jacket. I hope that you enjoyed hearing me talk about it. Maybe something I said was inspirational or informative in some way. So that's pretty much it. So thanks so much for watching. Thanks for spending some time with me today, and let me know your thoughts. And until next time, take care. Bye.